Some significant things happened in court today, and I think the defense quietly gained some ground. Here are the highlights and reasons.
Is it common when you are working as a medical examiner in a medical examiner's office that you review autopsies performed by other doctors?
Yes.
Okay, and is it common in your practice to testify as to your opinion regarding an autopsy that you did not perform?
Yes.
The jury doesn't know why this doctor is testifying instead of the original doctor. The prosecutor may not think that spelling it out matters because it was discussed in court, albeit outside of the presence of the jury, and the defense agreed to this. But the jury might wonder. Just wait. The defense is going to exploit this later.
Were there injuries to Mrs. Merritt's back, as we see here on the DNA?
Yes.
And can you describe what those injuries appeared to be based on your review of the case?
Yes, they are stab wounds.
I'm going to show the jury States Exhibit 65. Based on your observations, is it your opinion that those stab wounds in the photograph that's being displayed now are consistent with having been made by the weapon in States Exhibit 61?
Yes.
Okay. And are they consistent with each other in the sense that do they appear to have been made by the same blade?
Yes.
How so?
The edge of the knife either entered here but then was turned so that it pivoted on the initial entrance site or the initial axis.
Does that indicate to you?
I can say twisted instead of turned. That's what I meant.
Does that indicate movement by one of the parties to you?
Excuse me?
Does that indicate movement to you by one of the parties?
Well, it could be movement by the blade or it could be movement by the decedent.
Would Ms. Merritt have been able to move during those minutes after receiving that injury to the neck?
Yes.
They go through all of the injuries. Two things are noteworthy. One is that the injuries in combination resulted in death. Any of the sharp force injuries alone could have resulted in death, as would the blunt force injury to the head. Also worth mentioning is that none of the wounds would have immediately incapacitated her. I've been waiting to learn of the nature and extent of defensive wounds, if any, but they never spoke of any. This is important because Mrs. Merritt has been described as a strong woman, a firecracker. If she was attacked by an intruder, she would have fought back, and we would expect to see a significant number of defensive wounds. But looking at the anatomical drawings, we see the glaring absence of such wounds, which begs the question, why? Under what circumstances would she not fight back if she knew and trusted the attacker? If the attacker was someone she loved?
You did discuss rigor. When does rigor generally set in? Can you approximate that after the death?
It'll usually begin to set in within maybe 30 minutes to an hour.
And how long does rigor last?
Again, depending on environmental circumstances, rigor can last for up to 48, even in some cases 72 hours.
Based on your review of this case, would it be possible or would it be consistent with your findings that Ms. Merritt died sometime during the day of February 1st of 2019?
Yes, that would be consistent.
Now you're going to hear cross-exam. All through this trial, the defense has shown how astute they are in quietly planting seeds into the minds of the jurors. Remember, the jury did not hear that there's a good reason why this doctor is testifying in place of the original doctor. And the jury does not know the defense agreed to this.
Good morning.
You are not the medical examiner who examined the body of Ms. Merritt, correct?
Correct.
You never came in contact with the deceased in this case?
No, I did not.
You did not go to 1590 Planters Row?
No,
And you didn't visit the scene of this case?
I did not.
Your involvement did not begin until recently, correct?
Correct.
And that was when?
I believe it was last week.
Now, the state just asked you about time of death, and you indicated that that is a difficult thing to give, correct?
In some instances, yes.
And there was no actual time of death given in this case, right?
Correct.
Sure. The determination in this case was that it was a combination of wounds that caused the death. Is that right?
Yes.
In other words, it was not just one single injury.
Yes.
And you cannot say in this case the number of assailants involved in the death.
No, I cannot.
Nothing further. Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Weiner, would the injury to Miss Merritt's neck, would this injury alone have caused Mrs. Merritt to die?
Potentially, yes.
And what about the injury to the right side of her head, which you described as a blunt impact injury? Would that have alone caused Mrs. Merritt to die?
Yes.
I'm Deputy Chief Investigator at the DeKalb County Medical Examiner's Office.
Okay. Do you recall responding to Planter's Way in Stone Mountain on February 1st of 2019?
I believe on February 2nd, I did respond.
I apologize, February 2nd. What was the call in regard to?
It was in regards to a homicide.
Okay. Was the decedent still on the scene at that time?
Yes.
Do you recall what time you responded to that scene?
I responded at 2:15.
It was at 2:15 a.m. or p.m.?
PM, I'm sorry.
All right. Do you have experience with determining whether a body is in rigor mortis?
I do have some experience, yes.
And could you tell, just based on your observation, whether Mrs. Merritt's body was in rigor at that time?
Once I did manipulate her body and roll her over, I did observe her to be in rigor, yes.
And
Good morning, Investigator Winslow. When you arrived at the scene, I believe you said it was 2:18 p.m., you met with the officers that were already there. Is that right?
Yes, at 2:15.
And they
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. I think it was 2:15, my response time.
inform you about the scene that you're going to go into. Is that right?
Right, they gave me additional information and their investigation that ongoing at the time, but yes.
And at that time, they informed you about the suspect, Richard Merritt. Is that right?
Yes,
And that was the only person that they informed you about as a suspect at that time,
at
right?
that time, that is correct.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Sounds like the defense is suggesting tunnel vision on behalf of the investigators. Tunnel vision is a real thing, but nowadays investigators are cognizant of that and usually work to avoid it. Although whether or not police were tunnel visioned wouldn't change what this witness observed and wouldn't change how she did her job, this exchange is something the defense can use to support a claim of tunnel vision. They don't even have to come right out and say that. They're good at simply implying things. The state rested. Now Mr. Merritt has to decide whether or not to testify. Given his known behavior, plus the manner in which he has looked at the prosecutor during the trial, I expect he'll take the stand. If so, I will bring you that as soon as I can put it together.